Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. Thanking you for checking out this Parents and Caregiver series brought to you by Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative. Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. According to the National Association on Mental Illness, 43.8 million people, or 1 in 5 adults, experience mental illness in a given year. 50% of adults with mental illness report experiencing symptoms prior to the age of 14 years old, and 3 in 4 say they did so prior to the age of 24. That's a lot of grown folks who've experienced the onset of mental illness very, very early in their lives. When someone in your care enters the mental health care system, either voluntarily or otherwise, it can be scary for them and for those who love and care for them. Crisis mental health related episodes can be overwhelming, leaving parents and caregivers feeling confused or experiencing anger, grief, or guilt. It's important to remember that we all do the very best that we can with the information and resources that we have. And it's to that end that Brother Be Well produced this video to help you prepare for a mental health crisis. Preparation going into a mental health crisis can be key, and a part of preparation is understanding the ins and outs of a variety of systems so that you can be assured that you're doing what you can to ensure that your loved one is receiving the absolute best care possible. So today we're going to get the lowdown on systems, and I can't think of a better person to help us do that than Cherie Kreiner. She's a registered nurse. She's a former psych nurse, and she's the vice president of the Capital City Black Nurses Association. Cherie, how are you doing? Great to see you.
I am well. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back to Brother Be Well. Let's get on into this one, Cherie. I've been looking forward to it for a while. To get ready for this conversation today, I picked the brains of a few people who have known, loved, and cared for people who've entered, sometimes very, very quickly, the mental health care system. As a former psychiatric nurse, can you please tell us just how quickly one's condition or situation can escalate, necessitating entry into the mental health care system?
Right. So, in an instance, Michael, in an instant, literally someone can, it could be a chronic issue that builds up to an urgent state where they are in danger of harming themselves or others. It could be medically induced where someone that was taking medication abruptly stopped taking it, and now they don't have the mental capacity or they've created an urgent medical need. It could be an event or a traumatic event that triggers a response where the symptoms are so severe they cannot be handled at home. So, any of those situations that land you where you can't handle it at home, there's a safety risk for yourself or others around you, then that's when may enter the system at many different points.
I appreciate hearing that perspective from you, especially given your experience. Can you talk to us, Cherie, about emergency holds? I understand that's one option in crisis situations.
Right. So emergency holds are put in place so that we can stabilize the patient, whether it be at an acute psychiatric hospital or in an emergency department. It enables us to involuntarily hold someone to provide care to stabilize them up to 72 hours in some instances, and that can be extended longer. You may have heard the term 5150, which gives us the ability based on that safety need, right? They're in harm, at risk for harming themselves or others. And so that 72 hours gives us time to do an assessment to stabilize, whether it be with medication or just physically restraining. So sometimes that requires, like, restraining the arms or wrists and things to prevent harm. So that acute phase is just to say, hey, let's get you out of the danger zone and assess what needs to happen moving further. And if a longer hold is needed, there's a pathway for that. Or if a different level of care is needed, there's a pathway for that. So safety first, and then assessment, and then figuring out what the next best step is based on how you progress in that 72 hours.
And you mentioned that 5150, the emergency hold for adults, there's a 5585. It's the same thing for minors, I understand. So just so our viewers may hear those terms, I know 5150 gets thrown around a lot, but you don't hear much about the 5585. That's for minors. It's the same thing. Emergency hold 72 hours to help stabilize the situation.
Correct. And then a 5250 is an additional hold if beyond the 72 hours there's still a medical need to keep the person. They're still not able to make decisions on their own based on their mental status, or they're still at risk for harming themselves or others. Then there's a method to extend that hold a little longer. And then at a certain point, then that case has to go to court, and someone has to hear the case and decide that there is a mental health need to hold beyond that initial point. So we
I
do
see.
have those in place.
I really appreciate hearing it. I know a lot of people will too, Cherie. Let's talk about the process of having yourself, or I'm sorry, having a loved one involuntarily admitted. So the person in your care, they're not happy about this, but you as the caregiver make a decision and you have them involuntarily admitted into a facility. Why might that be recommended? If you could share some of the reasons why that might be recommended. And please tell us what we might need to know about that process.
Right. So you have to understand that the healthcare professionals have to assess the situation very quickly, and they have to do what's best. So safety first, making sure that this person is stable, that they don't have the means to harm themselves, that they don't have the means to harm others, and that if, for instance, they were on medication and stopped and then they need to get back on it, that they're safely taking those medications to bring that chemical balance back to a therapeutic range. So, though no one wants their loved one to be taken from them or a decision made on their behalf without them being involved, sometimes it's necessary because we're tasked with doing the right thing and doing what's safest and best at the moment. If you have a loved one that you care for a long term and you feel like they chronically are unable to make healthcare decisions for themselves or even financial decisions due to their mental health issues, then you definitely could explore guardianship and conservatorship that gives you some say if the court and their medical provider finds that they need someone to advocate on their behalf. So, other than just the acute situations, if you're a caregiver or a loved one that takes care of someone all the time, you may want to explore some of those options where you can be in the driver's seat and make some of those decisions for your loved one.
Appreciate hearing it, Cherie. Lots of great information there as well. Can you give us a picture of the inside of an inpatient psychiatric ICU? From what I've learned about them, just getting ready to talk to you, it sounds like the inside of one can be pretty intense. And I might even use the word scary based on some of the things I read. So if someone's kind of Googling things, as I did, and looking things up, I want you to help us give us a real picture of what that might look like, the ins and outs of a inpatient psychiatric ICU.
I would say that it's scary, but I would use the word unpredictable because the behavior of your loved one is unpredictable. As I mentioned, they could be trying to harm themselves, they could be trying to harm others. So sometimes we have to physically restrain people, we have to chemically restrain people so they may be more sedated or are not able to communicate in a way that you're used to. So it's really difficult outside looking in. I liken it to if you're seeing someone that had a heart attack and everyone's, doing CPR and pressing on their chest and they're bringing out the paddles to charge them. It's a scary situation. A lot is going on. You don't know what the outcome will be. You want to make sure that your loved one is okay. So it is definitely a hard situation to be involved in, but you have to trust and understand that the medical professionals are trained to deal with the situation. And then you also advocate just by being supportive, being there, being present, being available to provide history or information to the staff, and then also asking questions at the appropriate times so that you know all the next steps and what's happening. Specifically, if there's going to be a transition. As I mentioned, oftentimes people come through emergency rooms or emergency departments, and that may be the first stop, and they may be transported to somewhere else. So understanding what's happening now, what will happen next, and when you can talk to the attending physician or the primary care provider that's handling the situation. There's always a physician that's overseeing everything that's going on, so where you can ask more questions. So, and then also being patient. There's a lot of moving parts, and so be patient. And then I also encourage people that are spiritual to be prayerful. It's a difficult situation for everyone that's involved. Michael, one of my first weeks working in a mental health facility, I got kicked in the butt by one of the patients that was in an acute mental crisis. And I remember one of the other nurses that was training and said, "Well, are you sure you can work here?" But my heart, it really compelled me to know that people really needed help and that they weren't doing it on purpose, right? And we were there to help them. So I kept at it and did it for many years.
Yeah, yeah, doing God's work. It's a cliche, Cherie, but you really are doing God's work, I think. And before we go into the next question, let me just ask this: is it something I love the way you kind of walked us through a few different examples there about how very different and unpredictable. I like that better than scary. That the inside of a psychiatric ICU can be. Is it as simple as you're seeing a loved one in a totally different setting and then exhibiting behavior that you're not used to either? I mean, they wouldn't be there unless that behavior had gotten a little unpredictable. So maybe our listeners and viewers can just think about that. The whole thing has been you've upset the apple cart in a way. So there are going to be some things that might not look familiar to you, but they're all designed to provide care for your loved one and get them back to the place where they need to be.
Absolutely. And I'd like to encourage everyone to think about mental illness like you would a broken arm or any other physical injury. Oftentimes people are hurt because their loved ones may be using foul language or being accusatory towards them or just doing things that are seemingly off or out of character. And so oftentimes family members and caregivers will become offended or think that something's happening to them. Or as I mentioned, even up to being physically assaulted or spat upon or things like that. And they want to blame the individual. But I'd like to encourage you to remember that this is a mental illness, it's a chemical imbalance. They don't have the ability to decide what's right and what's wrong in those situations often. So that's where you have some patience to understand that that is their broken arm or issue that they need to get attended to. And so you definitely have to have some patience while that time is going through. I've seen a lot of family members be really heartbroken by what their loved one may say when they're going through a mental health crisis. And I have to remind them that it's the mental health crisis and not the person that they know and love intentionally causing harm, right?
Mm. I love the way you put that. Beautifully, beautifully put, Cherie. Thanks a lot.